It's the Jersey Blitz, NJ.com's high school football podcast. Welcome to episode 15, the season finale here of the Jersey Blitz. I'm Dan Long, and now we're going to be breaking down all 7 of our NJSI AA state football finals, and what a championship grouping it was over the last couple of weeks. We'll kick things off with the non-public A final. It was a matchup of the number 1 and number 2 ranked teams in the Garden State. And for the 4th consecutive season, Bergen Catholic emerged as the non-public A champions. They defeated their arch rivals in Don Bosco Prep by a final score of 25-7. And Ryan Patty, it was not a work of art, but Bergen Catholic, they found their way to create a masterpiece at the end, another championship at MetLife Stadium for Vito Campanelli and his Crusaders.
Yeah, Dan, that game was kind of the story of the season for Bergen. They found their way to win, and Bergen was almost like a championship boxer. I mean, like when you've thrown all your haymakers at them and you feel like you've got them worn down, like, no, they're gonna wear you down and break you down. And I remember, talking in the press box with you at halftime. I mean, me, you, and Luis were kind of chuckling, saying like, all right, like, when are they going to step on the gas here and start running the ball? And that's exactly what happened in the second half. And Najee Calhoun racked up all those yards, and Brian Porter broke those 2 long jet sweep runs, which I said could be a factor because of what he did the week before against St. Joe's. And don't be surprised if we see that a lot these next 2 years with Brian. But, they tried to get it to Quincy Porter in the first half, and it wasn't working a whole lot. Bosco did a very good job up front, generating some pressure on Dominic Campanelli, and he was running around a bit, and they did some good things in the secondary as well. And Dom actually ran for a score and was called back for a hold. So it wasn't really the cleanest game from Bergen, but if anything, it was probably their most complete game defensively. They got the 2 safeties and the 2 takeaways. They also blocked the punt from Ethan Colehall there in the end zone, and they took the ball away 5 times in that regular season game, but a couple of those were very self-inflicted, and this time it was all earned. I mean, Naeem Parrish had that interception on the tip pass. That was his 15th career interception, the school record there. And like I said, Colehall with the block punt, and they stripped, Dante DeLuca deep in Bergen territory, and they kind of, held on there. I think they were leading at that point 9-7, or maybe it was tied 7-7. But, overall, Bergen wins again. They win their 4th in a row, and their 26th straight in-state win. Coming back next year, they have a lot of kids back. They lose Campanelli, obviously, Quincy Porter, John Morris. They lose a few linemen on both sides of the ball. Parrish and Colehall are gone as well, but Calhoun and Dante Kane are back. Brian Porter, obviously. Jordan Thomas, Xavier Jackson there in the secondary. You might remember Jermaine Kinsler got banged up in the middle of the year. He's back next year. Jackson Vaughn and his 4 sacks in the state championship. He's back. And, Mason Mark is going to step in at linebacker. They graduate, the 3 linebackers, but they probably have about 5 or 6 key guys on offense, and they return like 7 or so key contributors on defense. So we're obviously going to have our top 20 discussion in August, but don't be surprised if Bergen starts the year number 1, because I think someone's just got to beat them for them to lose that spot.
And Luis Torres, turnovers once again the Achilles heel for Don Bosco Prep, even in the second meeting. But Don Bosco Prep, much like Bergen Catholic, they are stockpiled with a lot of talent coming back next season that's going to have them once again being one of those factors in non-public A.
Yeah, touching on the turnovers real quick, I think they were -3 in that first meeting in the rain when Bergen ended up winning by 4, and at MetLife they were -2, and it felt like it was kind of a microcosm of the first game a little bit, where a special teams mistake, instead of a touchdown, it was a blocked punt that led to a safety, which is one of the better plays of the game by John DeVere, the punter, kicking the ball out of bounds to keep that game kind of in check. They made a 9-7. They gave up another safety when they were pinned back deep. When Bergen pinned them I think it was at the 1-yard line, and then David Matesic had a safety. So the turnovers again hurt Bosco, but like you mentioned, they're in a good place heading into next year. Of course, they have to replace a guy like Devin Sisler, a quarterback who had a really good year in his second year in a Bosco uniform, getting accustomed to playing in one of the best leagues in the country. But you look at the roster, Coach Dan Sabella's team seems like they're in a really good place. You guys got like Dante DeLuca's back. The 2 receivers, the guy Murphy and Isaiah Alvarez, are both returning. They're both sophomores. They had standout seasons. Dylan Rona, who stepped in for Devin Sisler when Sisler was hurt in that first meeting, he'll be a junior next year as he kind of comes back and will get healthy. Defensively, we know what Matt Octopinti, Makai Allen, Aiden O'Neill, those guys kind of proved this season. So Bosco's in a really good place heading into next year, and they were much more competitive this time around in the state final against Bergen than they were 2 years ago when they lost 45-0. So I know Dan Sabella feels like his team is kind of close to breaking through, and we'll see. So Bosco heading into next year, they'll be in the conversation for one of those top spots in the preseason rankings heading into next year.
And Bergen Catholic's rallying cry after this one was for the hard way. 4 consecutive state titles, first time in school history. And a crazy stat, in those 4 games that they've won in a row, they've given up a grand total of 28 points total in those 4 games. So when you give up only 7 points a game, defense does win you championships. So BC took home the non-public A title. Then we shift gears to non-public B. And another Campanelli was celebrating at MetLife Stadium at the end of this one. It was DePaul Catholic, led by head coach Nick Campanelli, a 33-21 win against a very game and upset-minded Pope John side. And guys, again, this was a great matchup because we got to see them earlier in the season, and it became blowout central in the second half. This was competitive all throughout the game, and Ryan Patty, DePaul showed that they were just not going to be denied this season. They were the cream of the crop when it came to non-public B.
That's exactly right, Dan. And DePaul had moments where they were spotty on defense this year, and there's many of us who feel that this team probably should be undefeated, had they not unraveled there in that loss to Del Barton. But like you said, they were the team to beat, and they answered every bell this year. And the story for them was on offense. I mean, every team struggled to contain that offense, and the best job that was done against them was probably Don Bosco, because they gave up only 14 points defensively in that game. The other 7 points were from a pick 6 from Anthony Natoli. But Nolan James, Desi Jones, Elijah Burris, they combined for 53 touchdowns in their 12 games. And when you factor in Derek Zamet's rushing numbers, it comes out to 59 touchdowns from those 4 guys. So Pope John had a great end of their season. I mean, they were 2-7 coming into the postseason, but that schedule tested them, and it helped them get to where they needed to be by late November. But this DePaul team was just too much this year, and too much in both games against Pope John this year, especially the first game, but also in the second game they pulled away there late. But they weren't going to be denied. They had that same level of talent last year, but they just kind of couldn't piece it together. I think Nick Campanelli worded it as, we couldn't just gain momentum. We couldn't keep the momentum from one win into the next game. And they just, in my opinion, they weren't mature enough for that big moment last year, but they certainly were this year. They went through those trials and tribulations last year, and this was a senior class that just wasn't going to go 1-3 in state championships. They lost 2 to Red Bank, and this year they wanted to kind of break even and go 2-2, and that's exactly what they did. They started the year 7-0, and that was the first time they did that since 1997, and it was just an amazing year from start to finish for DePaul.
And quite frankly, Ryan, I've been able to cover DePaul since the start of their golden age of football championships since 2013. And I think hands down, this is the best DePaul Catholic side that I've seen in school history. So congratulations to them. And Luis, on the other side of the coin, Pope John, again, they have nothing to be upset about. They gave it everything they could in that state championship game. We were there in Wayne way back in late August to see the original matchup. And again, they got their doors blown off by DePaul in the second half. This was a back and forth game. And for a team that started their postseason 2-7 on the year, this is a pretty good season for Coach Dom Gasson, even though they finished under 500, to get back to the state finals and show and prove to themselves they can compete against the best that non-public B has to offer.
And it's all about building for what Coach Dom Gasson's done there. This now finished his 4th year, and they've gotten progressively better and better. Of course, the record's not going to look pretty at 5-8 to finish the season, but to, like Ryan mentioned, start the playoffs 2-7, beating Camden Catholic, going on the road, beating Paramus Catholic, beating St. John Vianney at home to clinch a spot in the non-public B final and get that rematch against DePaul. And like you mentioned, in that first matchup all the way back in week 0 where we were there, they probably could have taken the lead. I think they were up in the second quarter and had a touchdown call back. Taliko, one of the filthiest moves I saw all year, that was called back for a touchdown where he kind of made 2 defenders run into each other. And if they score there, they're probably up 14-6, and who knows how that second half plays out. But of course, Pope John, they lost Tyler Hauser in the second quarter of that game. I mean, he's the captain of that defense, middle linebacker going to Wake Forest, and him going down really kind of hurt them. And him coming back later in the year, starting with that game against Del Barton, where Del Barton kind of had a kick a field goal to win that game late. It kind of changed the outlook of Pope John, and they got healthier, of course, with that schedule that Ryan touched on, where they were tested the entire year, playing one of the toughest schedules in the state. And it worked out there for them here at the end of the year. Tyreek Hill had an incredible year, 2,300 rushing yards, 27 touchdowns. And it's going to be, I'm curious to see kind of how Dom kind of takes Pope John here over the next couple of years, heading into year 5. They got a lot of young guys, but they had to replace, like I mentioned, Tyreek Hill, Prince Joshua, Tyler Hauser, Wes Johnson, those type of guys. And I'm curious to see how they keep building, and kind of now the standard's been set at Pope John the last couple of years, getting to that non-public B championship, and they have to keep going and keep building.
So those were the 2 non-public championships won by Bergen Catholic in A and DePaul Catholic in B. And now looking at the Group 5 public school ranks, it was Toms River North again claiming their spot atop Group 5 in the Garden State, a 41-14 dominant victory against Union City and Joseph Dallas. Toms River North, you kind of thought throughout the season, is this team going to just flip the switch and take it into another gear? We saw that even when they were down in their sectional final against Rancocas Valley in the third quarter. They flipped the switch. There was no flipping of a switch. They just kept on powering their way at MetLife. They were making a statement against Union City, and they proved once again to be the championship team for a 3rd consecutive season.
You know, it's kind of funny because that's just what they seem to do all year long. You know, Point Pleasant Borough threw the switch, came back and won the game. Rancocas Valley down 20-7, scores 35 straight points, wins the game. Washington Township, they weren't playing great until the second half and pulled away. I think the difference in this game was, Dan, they just threw the switch in the first quarter instead of the third. And I mean, I saw Toms River North play 3 times this year. It was by far their most complete and dominating performance in all facets. You know, I talking to Mike Oyserowitz, Dave's brother, who's the offensive coordinator. Toms River North's big concern in this game was that on film, they thought Union City was much faster than they were. And then they got on the field and they found that not to be true. And then, you know, coaching was a big thing in this game, Dan. You know, Toms River North opted to put Mordecai Ford out into the flat. And again, what Mike Oyserowitz said was their goal was to put Mordecai in the flat, a little check down, and draw some of the UC defenders out of the back. It didn't work. And the North take on it was that Union City just believed they could get to the quarterback before he could check it down. And that didn't happen. Mordecai Ford had 3 touchdowns, all relatively easy, and that made a big difference in the game. TJ Valerio, the North quarterback, who unselfishly stayed with the program, even though Micah Ford was there ahead of him for 3 years. He finished with his first 4 touchdown game of the year, 13-18 for 161. And again, you know, Toms River North didn't look like they had this phenomenal rushing game, just like they have all year. Yet at the end of the night, they had 34 carries for 156 yards, and their leading rusher was a sophomore named Cole Garrison. And you've heard me talk about this kid for about the last 3 weeks. He will be the North quarterback next year. Lightning fast, good feet. I can't tell you if he can throw the ball, but I suppose we're going to find out. And the other thing, Toms River North was just monstrous on defense. Jaylene Matthews, Toms River North's all-world offensive tackle, was a savage on defense. Clearly his best game of the year. You know, some speculate that it was because, you know, Rutgers head coach Greg Schiano landed the helicopter at the Meadowlands and came and watched, and maybe that motivated Jaylene enough. But, you know, he made a play on second down in the first half that I think changed the whole game around. He just grabbed the backfield and flung the kid down, you know, never mind what he did in the first half. So, and the Toms River North defense, which somehow has managed, only given up 110 points during the year, but has managed to be underrated. I mean, they had 15 tackles for loss in that game. They had, you know, 6 players in double-figure tackles. And again, most of them in the back end. Nasir Jackson, 10 tackles. He's a D-back. Makai Morse, he's like a strong safety. He had 13 tackles. They just got more outstanding play from the back. their sophomore linebacker, Jack Baker, who is going to be who might be the best Townsend North's ever produced, had 14 tackles. And, Townsend North continues to roll. They have the state's longest winning streak. They'll start the year next year with that. They have a tremendous playoff run. And, I heard Ryan and talking about Bergen Catholic and Don Bosco. Now, on paper, Townsend North may not have the best team returning, but you're going to have to beat them in October and November before you knock them from the top team in the Shore rating.
So Thomas River North winning their third consecutive state title at Group 5 and Ryan Patty. Union City comes up short, but that was a historic season for Coach Valdez and company, winning another sectional title, making their first ever appearance in a state championship. And it was just simply the case. Thomas River North was the better team.
Yeah, Dan, absolutely. And I want to start by saying my thoughts and prayers go out to Union City's community. They lost, their former assistant coach, Lamar McKnight, a couple of days ago due to a tragic incident. It's really just tragic news. He was, an amazing coach, an amazing human being, and football is a hard topic right now for Union City. But, my thoughts and prayers go out to Union City's football community and just kind of that town as a whole, because they're mourning right now heavily. But as for the game, I hadn't seen Union City get outmatched by a public school like that in quite some time. St. Peter's, yes, we've seen it, but not a public school. And I think it's a credit to how good Toms River North has been these last 3 years and the job they've done. But, a lot of people question Union City's schedule. But I think you have to remember they took care of business against Northern Highlands. They beat a Passaic Tech team they had struggled with, the previous 8 times they played them. And they got over that hump, and then they won their state semifinal game over East Orange 42-0. And I just think Toms River North is a really, really good program. And Joe mentioned Jaylene Matthews. He was eating up space, and, Blaze Boland was also wreaking havoc. And, Joe mentioned that stop from Jaylene on that second and short, and that kind of set the tempo for the rest of the game. And, I might only need 2 hands to count how many times Union City had been stopped for no gain or for, a tackle for a loss coming into that game. But then Toms River North goes out and drops 15 tackles for loss. And when Jaylene made that stop, I was kind of like, wow, Union City's just not going to be able to run the ball today. And, they went to that I formation to start the second half, which was interesting. I've never seen Coach Valdez do that, but, it worked for a little bit, but they were just in too big of a hole. And ultimately, Toms River North is just way too good right now. They're the standard, and I can't wait to see what they do next year.
So that was in the Group 5 final at MetLife Stadium. And then we shift gears to the Group 4 final, which happened to be the last championship game to be played in 2024. It was at SHI Stadium, the campus of Rutgers University. And wow, I was a witness to utter domination put on display by Winslow. Winslow Township winning 35-0 against Phillipsburg in that Group 4 final. And Kevin Minnick, you've been telling us all about them all season long. It took me until that final game of the season to be witness in person. And boy, the Eagles did not disappoint. They made a statement there on their way to their first ever state championship.
Dan, like I've said to a lot of other people, I don't want to tell you that I told you so, but I told you so. And everyone got an opportunity who either watched the game live or watched it on demand, on our website, got to see what we've been talking about all year long. And the thing that sticks out the biggest to me is that all year, much like Millville, we talked about Winslow from an offensive perspective. Jalen Parker being this dominating quarterback and having weapons all over the field to throw the ball to, and a running game to keep things honest. But I think in all actuality, I'm more impressed with the defense. Their defense was phenomenal all season and really kind of sat back and let the offensive guys kind of quote unquote take the headline. But defensively in that game, they held P-Berg to 9 rushing yards total. They gave up 57 passing yards. So to have an advantage of 318-66 in a state final should be unheard of, but I'm not surprised. Winslow was that dominant defensively all season. And, after they beat Millville in that state semifinal, obviously no disrespect to Peaburg, but in my mind and in the mind of a lot of people, that state semifinal was the state final. And Bill Belton said, if we came out of that state semifinal feeling good about what we had done and had weathered the storm and taken Millville's best shot, which they did, it was the closest game they played all season, that going into the state final, not that there wouldn't be any nerves or butterflies, because that kind of happens naturally, but they felt comfortable and they looked comfortable. And they came out and they took care of business on both sides of the ball, but spearheaded by the defense. An interception returned by Nakir Helton for a touchdown. Sacks, seemingly every other couple of plays, they're in the backfield wreaking havoc. So, they did a tremendous job. If you look at them from start to finish, they knock off Montclair at the Battle at the Beach in the season opener, but get 2 players ejected in that game. They are walking on pins and needles all season long, because if they have one kid or one coach ejected for any reason, there's no playoffs. So that's one thing that Bill Belton did a tremendous job in keeping that team disciplined, to the point that when they were beating other teams and beating them decisively, that's when games can kind of get a little chippy. And the other team can kind of try to, work your nerves a little bit and try to push your buttons. Winslow didn't have any of it. They outscored opponents 559-87. They had 5 shutouts and gave up 8 points or less 10 times. So defense was the name of the game. Everybody loves offense, but like I said, in this particular state final, I thought the defense was just magnificent.
And they certainly were. It was one of the best defensive performances in all the championship weekends that we covered. And congratulations again to Winslow Township on their first ever state championship. On the other side, Mike Kinney, Phillipsburg, they had a tremendous season. They finally got over that hurdle, winning in dramatic fashion their sectional championship. They had a dominant victory in the state semifinals, but then you lose your last 2 games, including that epic rivalry in overtime against Easton on Thanksgiving, and then being blanked here in the state finals. Does that mar what was a great season for Phillipsburg?
Yeah, it did. No, absolutely not. As you said, it was a great season. It was a record-setting season individually for some of the guys. And they'd had tough losses the last 2 years in the sectional finals. They came back. They redeemed themselves by winning a sectional title. I had said a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about the state matchups, I wondered what would happen with Phillipsburg based upon that Thanksgiving Day game against Easton. No one can understand the emotions that go into that game unless you're from Phillipsburg. I'm not. So only through many years I've heard it from people from Phillipsburg. That is the game that they look to all season long. That's the matchup that they talk about forever and have been for generations and generations. They lose the heartbreaker with an overtime field goal by Easton. Who knows how much that took out of Phillipsburg that week of practice going into that game. Now, had they won, would they have beaten Winslow? Having seen Winslow, I say no, they don't. Winslow was a superior team. I really believe that. They had way too much speed, which Frank Duffy had said after the game. They were just too fast. But he also said, and I completely agree, that if things had gone okay for them in the first quarter, might have been different. It would have been a closer game. They might have had some chances. They might have made Winslow think a little bit. The second drive, after Winslow scored on their first drive, Phillipsburg answered in their second drive. They didn't do a whole lot in the first drive, but didn't look awful either. The second drive, they were moving the ball very well, and they were getting near the red zone. Interception for a touchdown made it 14-0. That was a killer for Phillipsburg. If you look at their next drive, they were flat. Next drive after that, they were flat again. They just could not, after that interception return by Helton, Phillipsburg just could not get the running game going. They were, Kevin pointed out, 9 yards rushing. When that happens against a team as athletic as Winslow, what Genovese is doing at quarterback is almost impossible, because he's now trying, knowing the running game is no longer there, against that secondary and those linebackers of Winslow, that unbelievable speed, he was just laid out, to suffer out there. He's throwing to some of the best, not some of the best, the best defensive backs he's faced all season long, and it was just brutal from that point because they just, without the running game, they were just. Everything was telegraphed as far as that passing game went. So they were just, if things had gone better on that second drive, and maybe they don't even score as long as it's not return for an interception. Maybe it's a little different, a little closer game. But I'll tell you what, the Phillipsburg team, Frank Duffy was so impressed with Winslow. He said they were just too fast for us. And nonetheless, it takes nothing away from this season, Dan. It was a tremendous season for Pittsburgh. They have a lot to be proud of.
For the Group 3 final, it was the lone game that was played on Sunday afternoon at Rutgers University, and it was a matchup of two teams that had a little experience hoisting some hardware at Rutgers, winning respective state championships over the course of the last two seasons. This time around, it was Old Tappan coming out with a 28-16 victory over Mainland in that Group 3 championship, winning their second state title in the last 3 seasons. And Ryan Patty, this was a wide open group. Old Tappan took control. They finished off with a decisive victory in that championship game. And now you have to really tip your cap and regard Brian Dunn, the head coach of Old Tappan, as one of those coaching icons, quite frankly, in Bergen County, alongside some of those other public school powers and even the non-public ranks. He just has built this program into a championship contender year in and year out.
Yeah, Dan, you mentioned the group being wide open, and it was, and I think two very deserving teams made it. You look at what Mainland did in that game against Somerville. Somerville looked like the team to beat in Group 3, and then all of a sudden Mainland responds after Somerville evens that game and sends it to overtime, and they beat them on that 2-point conversion. And Old Tappan had lost to Pascack Valley in the regular season, but in that state semifinal, they pummel them with a 43-14 win. And it just turned out that Old Tappan was playing the best football of any team down the stretch in this group. I think you have to look at the play of Alex Arecchio, the John Hopkins commit, and what he did in all three phases for the Golden Knights. He had 5 passing touchdowns, 12 rushing touchdowns, 7 receiving touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and he kicked all the team's field goals and extra points. There was nothing he didn't do this season. And if you didn't know Shane Small, you do now. He's the younger brother of Jack Small, who's now on the offensive line at Duke. But he had that late touchdown from Arecchio, and he had 2 sacks in that fourth quarter that proved to be difference makers down the stretch. And he missed the team's prior 2 games with injury, but he returned and made one of the biggest differences in the game. And like you said about Coach Dunn, I think you have to just marvel at what he's built, because he gets his kids to stay home, and that's why he's won so much. And that just doesn't happen up here. I'm just going to throw a couple names out there. Quincy Porter is from New Milford, and Nolan James, for example, is from Westwood. Like, those are 2 playoff teams in their respective groups that are like, wow, like, imagine if those kids stayed home. But that just doesn't happen up here. And that's not something you have to worry about if you're an Old Tappan fan, because if you're a kid who lives in Norwood, Northvale, Harrington Park, or Old Tappan, you're staying home and playing for Coach Dunn. And he's shown that you can win a state title under him. And the Fuller brothers have shown that if you're an elite enough athlete, you can play in the NFL under him. So hats off to Coach Dunn, and Old Tappan has just become an amazing football school.
And Bill Evans, Mainland came up short this time around, but in a transitional year, they were brilliant. Again, they were Group 4 state champions a season ago when they took apart Ramapo. Came up short this time around in Group 3 against Old Tappan, but they were led by one of their best players in Jake Blum, who was outstanding as a wide receiver, but again, just coming up a little short this time around at the championship final.
Mainland's team last year, that 14-0 team that beat Ramapo 56-0 in the state final, it was just one of those all-time teams. It, certainly in program history, maybe one of the best in South Jersey history for sure. I mean, you had the state defensive player of the year in Jamie Tyson. You had 4 other all-state players that all graduated, and a number of other, all group kids, and just that piece is, it was just a tremendous senior class. And you wondered this year, how they would, come back, and who would step up. And Blum was one of those guys who had 4 catches a year ago. This year, over 50 with 15 touchdowns. On the other side of the ball, 5 interceptions. Was really just a guy you didn't even really think about last year because he was. There were so many great players above him. Matt Mewitz was another kid on defense that really stepped up this year. Just showed what a great program that they have under Chuck Smith. With who we all know, Mainland has one of the best coaching staffs probably in the entire state. And I thought they had a great year. They won 10 games. Their only losses were the top 20 teams, as Ryan mentioned. Upset Somerville on the road. And then I thought it did well to hang with Old Tappan. They gave up an early score, and Old Tappan was driving. They go ahead 14-0. They got a pick, came back and tied it. And Old Tappan got a recovery of the second half kickoff on a pop-up kickoff that I think if Mainland comes up with that ball, maybe things are different. But certainly a tremendous season for them. Dropping from down to Group 3, I think helped them a little bit because they weren't going to be able to compete with the Millvilles and the Winslows of the world, but made another great run and kind of established themselves as one of those top programs in the state.
Looking now at the Group 2 state championship final at SHI Stadium at Rutgers University, third time the charm, this time for Rumson-Fair, their third consecutive appearance in a Group 2 final. They lost their first 2. This time they would not be denied. 26-24 win against Shabazz in what was statistically the closest played state final out of all the games. And Joe Zadalis, there was just outstanding coaching on both sides in this game, but there was a savvy play made by Rumson-Fair in that second quarter that really flipped the script from what was an upset in the making, potentially, if Shabazz were going to be taking care of that early lead that they held at 16-6. Coach Schulte, he decided he was going to roll the dice and learn from his mistakes of the last 2 seasons, and it came up with a big-time performance.
Yeah, the play you're talking about is a formation and a play they call Goose. It happened on a play. It was a punting situation. 1:59 left. Rumson is losing 16-13 in the game. So what Jeremy said after, Coach Schulte said after the game that, they normally play, and I wrote this, they played the game pretty straight lace and buttoned up, but they had to do something different. They saw some of the gimmick plays and trick plays and, shell game that Westwood played with the football last year. And the year before that, a fake punt by Caldwell hurt Rumson in that game. So he calls a play called Goose. And on the play, the Rumson punt team jogs on the field. They get set. Then all of a sudden they run off the field and back out comes the offense. Now, what Jeremy said was 2 things. One, make the opponent burn a timeout. Well, that didn't work. Rumson didn't have any. But the other is to catch them off guard, just to have them thinking, what's going on? Quick snap, 21-yard pass, first down, they go in and score, and they don't relinquish the lead the rest of the way. Really, Dan, in this game, I don't want to say it was their worst performance, but, it certainly wasn't their best. Shabazz did a marvelous job of taking away Rumson's, outstanding wide receiver, Jordan Angstridge. They took him away. He didn't get many, never mind catches, he didn't have many targets. So that created problem for quarterback Owen O'Toole. So we had to go to second and third options in the pass game. Then they pressured him. He ran for his life much of the night. But what Rumson was able to do was run the football, especially going left. Kellen Murray had a huge game. He, he's a diminutive kid, but he was fantastic in this game. 170 yards. It was his second highest rushing total of the year. He had 3 touchdowns. He was just great, and Rumson was able to hold off Shabazz to win this. And, I like I said, I really think they were destined in this one because earlier in the game, the Shabazz quarterback put a ball about 50 yards in the air right in the receiver's hands, and he couldn't hang on to it. or Shabazz has an even bigger lead. But, it was an emotional night for Jeremy Schulte. For fans who don't know, his dad, Jerry, a long time coach in the Shore Conference, a former head coach at Rumson, passed away during the spring. And Jeremy had tears in his eyes when he talked about, winning this one for his dad. But, looking ahead, Rumson's got a lot to replace. They have Murray back, but they lose 4/5 of their offensive line. They lose a 3-year starter at quarterback, but they are the deepest and largest roster team in the Shore Conference, over 100 players, and just figure they'll be in the mix again next year, Dan.
Again, it was just a gutsy play call there with, like you said, Joe, that play called Goose, a 4th down and 5, and just genius because Shabazz had no timeouts. Their punt returner was playing all the way back, awaiting the kick, never came up to play in the secondary. That changed the game, as then Rumson took the lead just before halftime. And Mike Kinney, Shabazz, they got off to a great start. They had that brilliant touchdown on the catch by Jalen Klein. He really did it all. They just could never really unleash him fully then later on in that game as a running back option, and also injuries started to play a toll as well at the quarterback position.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Dan. Jalen Klein did some great things. He showed his athletic ability, as you said, but he was not able to get out on the edge. Rumson did a great job of controlling the perimeter against Shabazz, and that's the key for Shabazz, and that's the key for Romello Tables in all games. If Jalen Klein can get outside on those runs, then he opens up things for Romello Tables, and we saw his arm, his powerful arm. He could throw the ball 60 yards downfield, and he's got receivers who can go get it. But when Jalen Klein is not able to establish the ground game for Shabazz, then it closes things off a little bit, and he's a little easier to identify where Tables wants to go in those situations. Rumson's too smart, too cagey to be fooled on that. But you're right. Great start for Shabazz. Everything to be proud of. That goose play, that's what Naz Oliver turned to after the game. He said that's the key to the game for them. They were so smart. They got out. They got that first down. He said it just killed our guys for a second. If you think about it, right, the next play after that game was a holding call, a defensive holding call against Shabazz that put the ball into the red zone for Rumson. They scored on the next play to take the lead. They go up 2016, and it takes a while for Shabazz to gather itself. Third quarter, not bad for Shabazz, but they're playing chess at this point. And the chess game is Rumson's able to establish a little better field position than Shabazz is, and they're able to go up again, go up 26-16. And then Tables gets hurt early in the fourth quarter, and that's a killer for Shabazz because now, they got to get back in the game passing, and without Tables, a little tough. At the same time, Kareem Costin, sophomore quarterback who started the first 3 games while Tables had to sit as a transfer, did a great job of it. He showed his poise by throwing a touchdown pass in the final seconds of the game. Shabazz never stopped fighting. That's what you wanted to see in a situation like this. They got bested by a marvelous play in that second quarter. Rumson won that second quarter, and they won that third quarter. When you do that, doesn't matter if it's a state championship, a first game of the season, or a preseason game. You win those 2 quarters, you're in good shape, and that's exactly what happened. Shabazz, tough way to end the season, but a fine season nonetheless.
So congratulations to Rumson-Fairhaven again, winning their first ever state championship at the Group 2 level. And our last championship game to feature, well, that's the Group 1 final at MetLife Stadium. There was no doubt who was going to be taking home this one. It was a dominant performance by Glassboro, 56-14 over previously unbeaten Cedar Grove. And Mike Kinney, Cedar Grove, again, so impressive this year. They got off to the start that they were looking for, what they were hoping for. But that tells you something. If an explosive offense just cannot keep up with the likes of Glassboro, the Panthers just had no answer.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And we all saw, we're sitting there, and I'm looking at the first 2 possessions for each team. Exactly the kind of game I thought it was going to be. Cedar Grove all season long. I mean, they came in averaging almost 35 points a game. They could go back and forth with anybody, and in the end, in the second half, they were going to keep going forward while the other team fell back because they were not able to play defense against that passing game. But after 14-14, Cedar Grove was unable to do anything really on their third possession. Then on the next possession, interception return for a touchdown, and I'm sorry, on the third drive, Cedar Grove wasn't able to do anything. Glassboro scored to go up 21-14, and then Cedar Grove throws a pick on its next possession. It's 28-14, and that was just it. Cedar Grove, just at that point, had just run out of gas. Their entire season of running up and down the field and being able to unleash that offense against everybody just weren't able to anymore. And as I had said, this is what happened against Phillipsburg, and it's what happened for Cedar Grove as well. Two other teams I cover. I'm sorry, Phillipsburg and Shabazz. Cedar Grove was just not able to get its ground game going, so they were not able to establish clock time. They were not able to move the sticks, and it left everything to Paradiso to try to get his boy Jackson Maurice open out there. And again, when you're talking about a defense like Glassboro, too fast, too crafty, too tough to throw against when they know that's what you're doing. So that third touchdown for Glassboro and then that interception return was key against Cedar Grove. Tough way to lose their first game, but man, Glassboro was good.
Well, Bill Evans, we're talking about Glassboro now. They wanted to make a statement after losing in the state finals the previous season. And boy, did they issue a statement that was heard loud and clear in that third game of the quadruple header at MetLife Stadium. And one of the performances for the ages, let alone in a state championship, just in any New Jersey high school football game this season and of recent time. Wow, Kenny Smith, I think he's still running, if you could hear him out in the East Rutherford night.
Yeah, 402 yards on just 20 carries. A couple 80-yard touchdown runs, a 60-yard touchdown run. A few credit to his offensive line because a few of those he was not touched, but he made a couple moves once he got to that second level that were unbelievable. I think that's going to be one of those performances, 10, 20 years from now, I kind of wrote about, like, it was a performance for the ages, even though we're only in our third year of state finals. And, I don't know if anybody's going to top that record for a long, long time. As far as a state finals performance, we're definitely going to remember it. And to me, Glassboro might have been the most impressive team that whole championship week. There was some question. We knew how good they were. Like they had 7 kids, with college offers as a Group 1 school. We're talking FCS or FBS. The Xavier and Amari Saab both have around 30 offers from FBS schools. Can pretty much name their the place they're going to be playing their college ball. But obviously they had a little bit of a soft schedule, and we've talked. Hopefully next year. The 0 week, that they get a Battle of the Beach game or another game against a really good team, a top 20 type team, so, that they can get an early test and we can get an early gauge on them. They went through the season pretty dominant. They got to the end of the year, they beat Shallock 20-10, and they beat Woodstown 20-7. And, those were solid wins against good teams, but then they played those teams again in the postseason, and they beat Shallock 40-9 and Woodstown 36-0. And, I think everybody wanted to see how they would, perform against an undefeated Cedar Grove team. And, they showed what kind of team they were by dominating an undefeated team the way they did. And, the state got a chance to see kids like Kenny Smith and, Amari and Xavier Saab and Brandon Simmons, who's one of the best defensive players in the entire state. And, Kenny Johnson had a huge hit that they really set that he was only a sophomore. Kenny, the state got to see how good some of these kids are. And, Kenny Smith will be gone. That they lose a couple other kids, but most of this team's back. And, it's going to be exciting next year. I mean, they're going to be the team to beat for sure in Group 1. They did take that step from last year when they struggled a little bit offensively. They're going to have to find, somebody else to step into that role at running back that Kenny Smith did. But, this is a program that's really established itself now. And, looking forward to seeing what they do in the future.
So again, congratulations to Glassboro, your 2024 Group 1 state champions, on that performance that people will talk about, as Bill Evans just said, for quite some time. So now we've reached the final huddle of this Jersey Blitz episode, number 15, and the final episode of this 2024 season. It's time for final takeaways on this 2024 season by each of our 6 NJ.com beat writers. Ryan, Patty, you'll start us off. What are your final takeaways from this Garden State Gridiron season?
Yeah, Dan, my takeaway is that these championship winning teams, we all pretty much had pegged as the teams to beat way back in August and September. If you look back at our preseason rankings, Bergen was number 1, DePaul was number 2, Toms River North was number 6, Winslow was number 8, and Rumson was number 20. And Glassboro was very much in the discussion. We thought very highly of them coming into the year, and we saw how good they were last year in the state final, even in a losing effort to Mountain Lakes. And Xavier Saab, we have a long way to go with Xavier Saab, but I think there's a chance that he could be playing on Sundays. And they're a Group 1 school, so that shows how special that team is and how special that team is going to continue to be these next couple years. Both Old Tappan and Mainland were in the discussion as well. I would say if it was a top 25 or top 30, they could be in it to start the season this year. You look at where we had the rest of the runner-ups. Don Bosco is number 5. So if there was any team we kind of had maybe underranked by a spot or two, it was them. Pope John was number 11. Union City was number 17. Phillipsburg was number 18. Cedar Grove was very high in our Group 1 rankings. I think they were number 2 pretty much the whole season in our Group 1 rankings. If there was any surprise for us, I would say it was probably Shabazz, because we didn't get to see them, at full strength early in the year. Once they got all those transfers on the field, we saw how good that team can be. But overall, it was an incredibly fun year, and I'm already counting down the days to next year.
Luis Torres, what are your final takeaways from 2024?
I'll echo what Ryan said. It was an incredibly fun year, year 3 for me covering football here as a staff. And I'm going to touch on some of the teams that had breakthrough years in my area, beginning with a team like Hanover Park, who Coach Dan Fulton guided, along with those players like Joey Borello, Joey Philippone, Hector Lopez III, all those guys winning their first sectional championship since 1990 and just the second overall in school history, breaking through, which was a couple years kind of in the making for that program, and seeing a resurgence in Glen Rock. Coach Cal McCord did an incredible job there in his first year. Came up short of sectional championship, losing to Hanover Park, but the year that Glen Rock had in the NJIC, making an NJIC final for the first time, I think it was either ever or the first time in years, there in the small Bergen County school. And the year that quarterback Nick Atme had, and two-way lineman Pete Langeman, who's going to Bucknell. Incredible year for that school and that program, and excited to see what Coach Cal McCord does moving forward as he enters his first offseason as the head coach, coming off his first full year and heading into his second year. A team that I think will be in the conversation next year in Group 2 is High Point. Bill Percy took over that program and really turned it around, hired a great staff. Former Randolph coach Will Nahan was a defensive coordinator there, and High Point had an incredible year, making a sectional semifinal, which they ended up losing to Glen Rock. And that's a team that could be looking at potentially playing their first sectional final ever in school history next season, with running back Jared Martress, who will be coming back after running for 1,600 yards and I think 25 touchdowns this year. So it's an incredible year for High Point. They're a team that look out for next season, and kind of in the Group 2. And a team like Mendham, of course, I touched on them weeks ago. Of course, their season ended losing to Riverdale. Riverdale had an incredible year. DJ Nymphius doing his thing, guiding that team to a sectional final. But Mendham breaking through, winning their first division title in years. Best team that Ethan Jaros has had there now in his 4 years. And I'm curious to see kind of next year when we're having the conversation here, which other teams in kind of the Morris, Sussex, and Bergen County areas kind of do break through and have incredible seasons, kind of have resurgent years after having down years. So those are four of the teams that I was impressed with this season, kind of having resurgence or breaking through.
Kevin Minnick, what were some of your final takeaways from 2024?
Well, Dan, I kind of look at it in this way. There are football teams and there are football programs. And there's a reason why, like Ryan said, a lot of the teams that we figured from the start ended up at the finish. And what I want to find out is a program like a Mainland and a Millville, a Glassboro, Winslow from South Jersey, are they going to be able to maintain this kind of skill level and this kind of success, not just for one cycle of students, not from the freshman to a senior, but for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years? Are they going to be able to put this kind of performances together, not necessarily state championships, but are they going to be able to be dominating teams year in and year out? And are we going to see these teams become programs? Are we going to see other teams become programs? Because to me, a program is going to be in the mix year after year, while a football team may have a good year one year, but then may slip and have to go through the cycle again. So my thought is, like, Toms River North just won 3 straight state championships. Are they going to win a 4th? They very well could. That's a football program. So I think, Mainland, Millville, Winslow, Glassboro, from my perspective, are football programs. And I'm just really interested in seeing what happens to those schools, clearly based upon what they've done these last couple of years.
Bill Evans, what are your final takeaways from this past fall?
Kevin mentioned some of these programs. When this year started, it was the first year of a 2-year cycle in the West Jersey Football League, and when they created the American Division, and we looked at Winslow and St. Augustine and Millville, Mainland and Cherokee, a lot of people looked at it and said, this could be the best division we've ever seen in this conference. And I think it turned out to be. I mean, Winslow 14-0, Group 4 state champs. Millville 10-3. 2 of those losses were to Winslow. They were a sectional champ, lost to Winslow 13-7 in the sectional semifinal, in the closest game Winslow played all year. And I think when Winslow went up to the states and did what they did against Phillipsburg, really showed how good of a team Millville was. St. Augustine once again showing that they can play with some of the best teams up north. They beat Del Barton, which was number 3 at the time. Another year where they've got to a state semifinal and beat one of those premier programs up north. Mainland, again, Group 4 state champs last year. This year made it to the state final in Group 3. And then, the last team was Cherokee, which was really decimated by injuries this year. Went 0-4 in the division, but they were a heck of a football team. I mean, they finished 5-6. So they went, 5-2 outside of the WJFL American. Won a playoff game on the road at Old Bridge. And then went to Atlantic City and lost a close game to a very good Atlantic City team. So that division lived up to the hype this year. A lot of those teams, obviously, the division will be the same again next year, and the teams will change. Will a little bit. Obviously players will leave and others will come in. But just as excited to see what these programs do, because I really think that these were some of the best teams in the state in one division in the WJFL.
Mike Kinney, what are some of your final takeaways from this past 2024 football season here in New Jersey?
Yeah, Dan. First of all, how hard it is to finish a season undefeated. 3 of the teams I cover the Big Central Conference and Essex County. 3 of those teams lost their only game this season in the playoffs, and of course it became all the more difficult as the playoffs got extended over the last few years, from sectional finals to semifinals, and then from semifinals to overall group finals. And nonetheless, I look back at the Big Central Conference and Essex County, and I saw some fabulous performances this year, team and especially some really unbelievable individual performances from some kids who've been doing it for years. You look at the Cedar Grove team that went 13-1, and Stephen Paradiso at quarterback, and Jackson Maurice at receiver. Amazing seasons and careers. Stephen Paradiso threw for almost 8,000 yards in his career, 93 touchdown passes. Jackson Maurice caught 99 passes this season alone for 1,800 yards, and finished his career with 2,500 yards in receiving. The Phillipsburg team with quarterback Jet Genovese threw for 4,500 yards in his career, and Matt Scarabo, the outstanding receiver, had 50 catches for 1,000 yards this year, and he finished his career with over 2,000 yards. I look at the Somerville team that went 12-1 and lost their only game to Mainland in the Group 3 semifinals. Terrell Mitchell going to Rutgers, had a fabulous year, 1,400 yards rushing in his career with 2,600 yards. And a team like Bernards finished 11-1. They lost to Shabazz in the sectional final, but that's a team. They're there every year. They're always knocking on the door for a sectional title, and they are going to be back. The first three teams I mentioned are senior oriented, and they're going to have to rebuild a little bit. But this Bernards team, other than linebacker Terrence Hanratty, who was outstanding, one of the best linebackers I think in the state, their offense fueled by a bunch of sophomores. Nolan Walsh surprisingly came in as a sophomore quarterback, and sophomore running back Patrick Carlisle, junior running back Logan Stevens. They have a bunch of young pups for Coach John Simoneau and offensive coordinator David Carmen. They're going to be an exciting team to follow. So that's one of those teams with one loss who may finish 2025 without that one loss. So I'm very excited to see what's ahead for my teams in the Big Central and Essex County. I thought it was a fantastic year, even though no state champions. Phillipsburg got to a state for the first Big Central team to get to a state championship team, and I've had two Essex County schools reach championships, and that was Cedar Grove in Group 1 and Shabazz in Group 2. So, I look back at the teams I covered with a lot of pride, and I thought it was an outstanding season.
Well, Joe Zadalis, we're at the goal line. You have to get us across that goal line and into the end zone to finish off this last segment of the last episode of the Jersey Blitz. What are your final takeaways from this 2024 New Jersey high school football season?
Well, Dan, my takeaway is actually a look ahead to next year. I know on Selection Sunday for the non-public state tournaments, our ire was raised when, the NJSIAA seating committee, and they only use the seating committee for the non-public tournaments because the OSI PowerPoint system does not work with the non-publics. So they had a committee and they put out rankings or seatings in non-public B that I think we all felt like were erroneous, not intentionally or anything else, but we're wrong. So Tarig Holman, the head coach at St. Thomas Aquinas, is trying to get together a grassroots effort, and he has a letter written. I don't think it's gone to Robbinsville yet. And what he's asking the NJSIA to do is lend some transparency, further transparency to the selection process. Nobody knows who this committee is comprised of. They essentially go into a room, figure out the seeds, take a piece of paper, throw it on a table and say, here you are, and they leave. There's no appeal process. There's no explanation. There's nothing. So what Tarig is hoping what he's suggesting is to put together two rankings, almost like they do with the CFP tournament at the NCAA level. At least let us know where you think we're going to be, or where we are in your thinking 2 weeks out, 1 week out, so we have an idea where we stand on Selection Sunday. He has mentioned about getting the media involved because the only people who really see all these teams play is the media, whether that's us or some other news outlet. And the interesting thing is, a lot of people look at this and go, well, it's only a non-public B issue, which means it's not a big deal for the North. But Don Bosco is one of the programs backing Tarig's thoughts, as is Red Bank Catholic, who probably benefited more than any other team from the misseedings in non-public B. St. John Vianney, Holy Spirit, Camden Catholic, he's hoping to get more. So, he's going to send his thoughts, if he hasn't done so already, to Robbinsville and see if we can get that non-public B to just be a little more transparent. One of our guys brought up the idea of, okay, after the meeting, have a 15-minute Zoom call and allow the media to ask, well, why did you seed Red Bank Catholic number 2? Why was this team number 4? At least give the coaches and the parents and the fans an opportunity to find out what transpired and how. So, when I look back at this season, I think that was a big issue. Granted, the right team won non-public B. DePaul was dominant. But, the process is important to the coaches and the players and the fans. So hopefully Robbinsville reads the letter and comes to some accord or finds a way to fix it, Dan.
Well put there, Joe. Well put. So that was the final takeaways by all 6 of our NJ.com football beat writers. I just want to be, full of joy here to say that it has been an honor and a privilege to be able to talk football with each of these outstanding beat writers throughout the course of this entire football season. Ryan Patty, Luis Torres, Mike Kinney, Kevin Minnick, Bill Evans, Joe Zadalis. There are no better beat writers in all of the Garden State than these 6 guys. And it was so much fun to be able to just talk about these big time games, the coaches, the outstanding student athletes that New Jersey is blessed to have. It was an honor and a privilege, certainly, to help navigate the ship here on the Jersey Blitz. We would not have been able to do any of this, fans, without the incomparable leadership of Brian Dekine, who did everything behind the scenes in making sure that we sounded correct, our microphones were working, everything was all set. So we'd like to thank Brian for his intrepid leadership in launching this first ever season, the Jersey Blitz. The feedback has been tremendous. We thank all of you for tuning in throughout the course of the regular season and the postseason and spreading the news to your family and friends to tune in. And we look forward to doing much more of this in seasons to come. So for all of my compatriots here at NJ.com, I'm Dan Long saying so long here from the Jersey Blitz, NJ.com's high school football podcast. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in throughout the entire season. Over 30 broadcasts that I was able to do here this year on NJ.com. We're the leader in NJ.com, and we're looking forward to bringing you all the coverage in 2025's football season. So for everybody here, I'm Dan Long. So long here, and thanks for listening to the Jersey Blitz.